So today I'm talking about communication and as we would use it with support, but also I guess underneath all my comments is the conviction that good communication will work in different situations, whether it is a support situation, whether it is an interview situation, or whether it's just peer-to-peer interactions. And I take all of my comments today from the notion of buyer personas. So in order to contextualize my comments, I'm going to talk about buyer personas on their own, and then I'm going to talk about the ways in which buyer personas, although they are a marketing tool, turns out to be very helpful for other sorts of communication. If anyone is interested in doing further research, the two books that articulate most everything I'm going to be talking about today are The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. Has anyone read that? It's old at this point. It's kind of a classic. I think he's going to be answering yes to everything I ask. I highly recommend this book. It's about design. The authors of this book started with a very basic question. Why do software products that engineers love make users so unhappy? Very basic question, and the first time it was put into print was about 20 years ago in this book. This book was the first time in marketing someone said we need to actually talk to customers about what their daily life is like, what the experience is of going through their day. Not what they think they do, but what they actually end up doing. Then, if you're interested in what I say today about buyer personas, I try to, as a former academic, acknowledge all my sources. Most everything I'm going to say today comes from Adele Ravella's excellent book, Buyer Personas. I am not paid by her, although at this point I think I should be. This is a wonderful title. You should check it out. Definition of buyer personas. I think it's important to start with a very clear and thorough definition so that we're all on the same page. A buyer persona is a constructed yet authentic, and there we have an interesting tension between two contradictory terms, but a constructed yet authentic avatar or image or archetype you hear sometimes of a real buyer, fashioned from out of candid discussions or one-on-one interviews, which reveals the frank yet often hidden fears and aspirations that really drive decisions. This is not a customer profile. And if you have a marketing background or a sales background, you're probably familiar with demographic data, psychographic data, and customer profiles. This is an example of one I took off Google of a very standard customer profile. And it's a real one, and I mean no disrespect to the people who made it. For a customer profile, it's fantastic. But I want to make clear that we're understanding the distinction between a buyer persona and a customer profile. So this is about Anne. Anne is probably a made-up person. That's probably a stock photo. And Anne, as we can see, is retired. She's 61. She was a full-time high school teacher for 25 years. She has a bachelor's in history. She lives in Southern California, and she's really into beading. Anne is a beater, and that is a B-E-A-D-E-R, beater, and that's her hobby. And so I can imagine that this was probably developed by the marketing team at a beading magazine for hobbyists. So you have all this information, how much time she spends on beading, how she learns about more beading. Anne has all this information about how Anne relates to her beading. I think that probably everything here is made up. Marketing research and business school research suggests that almost all the information you see on these things, and you probably, if you have a background in marketing, have seen a lot of these things, it's almost always made up at night by the marketing team before the day before the presentation is due. So we already have a problem that, if it's made up, it's not going to be very helpful. But here's what I find particularly interesting. If we look down in the bottom left, what they think. What does Anne think about her beading? What does it tell us? 20-year beader who prefers mixed media projects. Online reading, beading daily, bead blogs, bead instructor Facebook pages. Subscribes to beading magazines. Wants to learn new beading techniques. Fan of Kufam Gray, Kim Se-jin, and Lorelei Erto. Why am I bringing our attention to this? What is the problem that I see between the headline and the information offered. Yeah, the headline is what Anne thinks. Here, more data. Data that's probably made up, data that can be easily inferred, but it's still not particularly useful to us. And also, it's misrepresenting itself. They're telling us, they're going to tell us what Anne thinks, and then they don't. This, I think, shows the heart of the value of actually talking to your users or your customers. Because reading all this, my initial question is, hey Anne, why do you sell on Etsy and not eBay? That actually, I think, is a very interesting sort of question. Who knows? When Anne got started, maybe Etsy was hot, new, and exciting, and she's on the cutting edge. Maybe for Anne, eBay looked junky, and she thought of its brand as being the place for yard sales and crap and not her artwork. These are the questions that I think could actually tell us something about who Anne is and how she relates with what our solution is. In fact, I'd really like to talk to Anne. I'd like to get her comfortable. I'd like to get her dialoguing with me. And I'd like to know things like, hey Anne, when you were a child, did you dream of being an artist? I actually think this could tell us a lot about her. Anne, before you became a history teacher, is a career in the fine arts something that you aspired to, and you made the decision to become a teacher because of practicalities, because you had kids, because you wanted a steady paycheck, because in those days women got solid jobs? I'm not entirely sure, but this is the sort of information I would want if I were trying to craft messaging to Anne. And finally, and this is a sensitive one, this is not how I would start, but I would really love to know if Anne would be doing this if her husband were still alive. If she weren't a widow, would she be selling her beadwork on Etsy? Again, I'm not going to call her up and start with it. But this is the sort of information I want. Now, you may not have these particular examples in mind, but I hope you're seeing that there is a real difference in kind between knowing what blogs she reads and what makes her tick. And I guess something axiomatic throughout this entire presentation is that if we want to reach our users, our customers, potential customers, or if you're doing support and you want to reach the people who are upset with you, that's usually how support works. Maybe not at your company, maybe that's just Zoho, but these are the sorts of answers that will actually help us get somewhere. So the way we do all of this is through a conversation. Does anyone know the etymology of the English word conversation? A fun tidbit. I used to teach Latin. Converso, it means to turn together, but it means to dance. And I think this is a good image to have in mind. That when you are talking with your users and your customers, whether it's a sales situation, a marketing situation, or a support situation, you want to imagine yourself having a dance with them. I imagine a waltz because it's two, one person's leading, one's following, but usually they're equals doing about the same things. But I think it is an expansive enough metaphor for that sort of thing. This is where buyer personas come in handy, because the groundwork or the framework for buyer personas offers, I think, the best way to think about conversations that you need to have with your users, your customers, and with leads. The entire thing of buyer personas starts with your marketing team or a volunteer sits down with a customer and has a 30-minute conversation. If you all are talking with your customers or your support people or prospects already, consider this approach. Adele Revella suggests that you go into it with only one question prepared. That's great because it takes minimal prep work. But you go into it with one question prepared. The one that is suggested and is formulaic and is for sales situations is, tell me about the day you first realized you needed a new solution. I think we can all tell that this is worded in a particular way. Tell me about. We are inviting the person we are talking to talk at us. We are opening the door and we are letting them know, for better or for worse, the term safe space is in the news and we all may be familiar about it. But in a way, that's what we want to do. If we want our user to reveal the equivalent information of, I would not be beating if my husband were still alive because we had dreams of spending our retirement RVing and he had a heart attack, that's why I bead. If you want to get there with your customers, don't pull that out at the beginning. Create a safe space so you two can dance together. The one we like is, in a sales situation, tell me about the day you first realized you needed a new solution. I think when we ask them to tell us about the day, hopefully we can get them to remember that day. Remember the day that their thinking changed and they started to see you as a positive force, or your product as a positive force in their life. I mean, this is another way of saying what we're really trying to do is avoid interview bias and survey bias. If you're not familiar with those terms, here's how to think about it. Most people want to sound smart, most people want to sound responsible, and most people want to sound rational. Whether or not they realize it, they want to sound good to the person they're talking to. When you start to interview someone about your solution or about the problems they've had with your support, usually people, even if it's unconscious, slip into a different way of thinking. They want to sound good. They want to sound rational. Or if they're really angry, they might not care about sounding rational, but they certainly want to sound like they're righteous. What we want to do is disarm all of those thoughts in people and get them actually talking. So with these open-ended questions, what we are doing is we are trying to disable interview bias and survey bias. What we really want are tangents. It seems counterintuitive when we're all trying to be efficient with our time, but once people start talking, if you're able to listen, they will eventually reveal something that tells you the information you need to know. Even in that situation, I'd sometimes say, why don't we go talk in here? The first 3 things people said are usually not it. People might be upset about the name tags. People might be upset about the cost, upset about our misspelling. All makes sense. But as we talk a little bit, there's actually this thing in CRM that they thought would work better by now, and we still haven't fixed it. That's what I want to know about. So we begin with open-ended questions and interrogatives. I assume that these will be familiar to most of you, but whenever you're talking to a customer, marketing, sales, or support situation, use these. What, when, where, which, and who. One of the things that we have found that I would never have guessed is never use why. Why aren't you happy? Why didn't this work? For some reason, if you ask, when did this not work? Tell me about the day that you were first angry with Zoho, you get a real answer. If you say to someone, why are you unhappy with Zoho CRM? Interview and survey bias kick back in. And when people hear why, they stop thinking about their own experience and they start thinking about sounding rational, intelligent, or at least justified when they're talking to me. So when you all are doing support or talking to leads or talking to existing customers, try this. See if you don't ask why, you get a different sort of response and you get more valuable information out of the conversation. So again, we're talking about open-ended questions. I did an experiment with our marketing team, and I said, does everyone know what an open-ended question is? And everyone said yes. An open-ended question is one that can't be answered with yes or no. Very basic, we've all got that. I said, great, let's all go around the room and pose one open-ended question to the group. The first 3 people got it great, but there were 12 in the room. By the time we got to 6 through 12, almost nobody could do it as quickly as we needed to, which led me to think that we all, maybe not you all, maybe it's just me, should practice our open-ended questions. A closed question, are you satisfied? Yes, no. And actually, if you work in support, satisfaction, I think, is a very inaccurate and unhelpful measure. The reason people are happy or unhappy, I often can't do much about. So instead, I ask them, when, back to when, are you most frustrated or if they're having a good day, when are you most delighted by our solution? Just changing the way you ask the question really changes the dynamic of the conversation. Did it perform as expected? Why would we avoid asking this question in a support situation? Because it never does. Or, very rarely does it. We know from talking to support what some of our users and customers expect things to do is unfortunately not realistic, or not realistic for the product, not realistic for the free plan, or not realistic for their knowledge of the product and their own acumen with software. So rather than saying, did it perform as you expected? If it did, they wouldn't be calling. When did it perform as you anticipated? Again, back to when, take me to the day, tell me the story, but also I took out expected and I put in anticipated, because I don't like to deal with expectations. They're usually unrealistic. That's why I don't have children. But anticipated, I actually get some information I can use. Is it easy to use? Is it intuitive? Is it seamless? Again, if you all do any marketing, you know that easy to use, intuitive, and seamless, everybody is easy to use, intuitive, and seamless, or every product or solution is easy to use. Ends up not telling me anything. When are you excited about logging into Zoho? When are you apprehensive about dealing with your CRM? These are questions that actually get to the problem that they're having. So overall, all I've been talking about is bridging the gaps. I work on the communications team. We are an internal team, and our job, we were hired on basically to narrow the gap between what happens in the US offices of Zoho and our offices in India, in Chennai. And one of my jobs is to evaluate a lot of writing that comes out of Chennai. There, it is very easy to appreciate and understand the gap. Language, culture, history, 20-hour flight, 12.5-hour time difference. We got that. But when I started looking into communication techniques that bridge the gap, I found that they are everywhere. Even if we're all from the same place, even if we all work in the same company, talking together or dancing together is often so much more difficult than we think. And I've come to realize that we're not going to get anywhere if we just ask yes or no questions. What we really need to do when we're dealing with our customers in support situations or marketing situations is, cheesy as it sounds, make everyone comfortable enough that they do want to dance a little bit with you.